Hi, everyone. I'm Leanne Knobloch. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Illinois. And my research focuses on communication during times of transition within marriage and family relationships. My work has been guided theoretically by relational turbulence theory, which considers how people think, feel, and behave when things are changing in their relationships. Some of the work on relational turbulence theory has looked at the transition to marriage, the transition to serious dating within courtship relationships, the transition to parenthood, the transition to empty nest, the transition to a very serious mental or physical illness, and transitions across the deployment cycle for military families. And I could go on and on. Those are some examples of the kinds of transitions that relational turbulence theory focuses on. In terms of my personal research, I use a hypodeductive paradigm to guide my research, and I typically use quantitative methods, although sometimes there are some important research questions that can only be answered by other methods. And so some of my research also adopts some qualitative methods to get an in-depth understanding of the kinds of issues that people are experiencing in different kinds of transitions. I'm excited that you'll be learning new material this semester in your courses in terms of communication theory and research. Some advice that I would give in terms of what's important for new researchers to learn is to really think about what the end goal is. What are you trying to accomplish with research? Or if you're reading other people's research, what is it that they are trying to accomplish? I think if we keep that end goal in mind, we'll be able to make better decisions in terms of our measurement and who we invite to participate in our study and what kinds of standards we're going to set for our research. If you have your end goal in mind, what you want your findings to do, and how you want them to contribute to the literature or to theory or practice, I think that will help guide all of those very important decisions that you have to make along the way. There are lots of projects that I'm working on right now that I'm very excited about, but the main one that has been the focus of my attention for several years is a big project that I'm working on that was funded by the US Department of Defense, where we studied 500 military couples over the course of the transition from deployment to reintegration. And we asked those military couples to complete an online survey once per month for 8 consecutive months, starting at homecoming and extending throughout that transition. Our findings have been very interesting because we have identified the first month or two as very important for intervention for helping military couples. We've mapped the trajectory of mental health issues and relationship challenges across the transition, and we've tried to understand some of the factors that predict healthy patterns of communicating from unhealthy patterns of communicating across that transition. Now, if all you do is watch YouTube videos, you'll be convinced that the transition and the return home from deployment for a military service member is all roses and balloons and parades and surprises. And yes, there's definitely part of that that's involved in the transition. But it's also a bunch of hard work because military families have been separated for a year or more, and everyone grew and changed a lot during that time. And so bringing a returning service member back into the family life can be really challenging for everybody involved. And so I've been excited that this project has been able to shed some light on recommendations for helping military couples and military families transition more effectively across the deployment cycle. In terms of a methods topic that I find particularly interesting, there's a lot, but in this message, I want to focus on how you translate the findings that you have into something that can help people down the road. And this goes back to my earlier advice about making sure that you have your end goal in mind the whole time that you are developing your study. Once we have our findings, hopefully, once we've written them up for publication, maybe they've been published and we're thrilled about that. But after that point, do we want them to just sit in academic journals and not really be helping the people that we have designed our studies to help. No, we want our findings to be able to make a difference in the lives of the people that we've been studying and people like them. That's why we got involved in this research, presumably in the first place. So there's a lot of ways that research findings can be disseminated into lay audiences. You can think about things like press releases and blog posts. You can think about YouTube videos. You can think about media interviews, Facebook posts, Twitter. Any kind of social media and any kind of dissemination channel is fair game. But many researchers are trying to translate their findings to a broader audience so that they can influence positively either policy or practice, or just train and educate the people that their findings can touch. And so in my work with military families, I'm always working with an eye towards, okay, what do these findings mean for real people in real situations, and how can I get my findings out to help them the most? As you do that, I would encourage you to do a couple of things. First of all, it's very important to step back from your findings to think about what they mean in a larger context. Sometimes we can get so wrapped up in the academic and social science part of what we're doing that we lose the forest for the trees, right? We've spent months and months and months gathering the data, analyzing the data, perhaps writing up the results for a scientific audience that we can sometimes forget the real people that stand behind these findings. And so it's very important to take a step back and really think about, okay, what do these findings mean for practice? If I was going to sit down with members of my target population and say, wow, I did this study and I've got some cool findings, let me share them with you so that you can help communicate more effectively in the situations that you find yourself in, what would you say to them? During this process, it's very important that you leave your academic writing behind and use more of a creative writing hat instead. If you're going to be disseminating, let's say, a press release or responding to a written media interview or on Twitter or Facebook. Okay, what does that mean? That means don't use academic jargon. That means speak in the language and the vernacular of the people who are going to be disseminating and receiving your results. Try not to use a bunch of acronyms or fancy language that will not be familiar to people in your target population. So really adopt the language practices and the kinds of even sentence construction and ideas that resonate with your target audience. Because if you try to disseminate something that's full of jargon that people won't understand, your opportunity will be lost. And so think of this as an exercise really in public relations. Third, I found it to be very helpful to share early drafts of your work with members of the target population. And so what we do is we write a short research summary, 1 page, no longer, bullet points mostly, very concise, and we share that with members of our sample, the people who signed up to receive our work. We keep a list of that during the study itself. At the end of the survey, there's usually a question, hey, do you want to receive a summary of our findings? And when we do that, we share it and we ask for feedback and we say, okay, what kinds of suggestions do you have for making this document more clear, more understandable? Were there things that you didn't understand? Are there things that you disagree with based on your perspective? And we solicit their feedback. Now, you can do that with members of your sample if you request permission from the IRB to do that in advance. If you don't, that's okay. If you can find other members of the target population to circulate your document, circulate some of the language and the sentences that you're using, and just ask for feedback. You'll learn a lot in terms of what's too jargony, what's too scientific, what works really well in understanding and translating those findings to a target audience. So if you keep those principles in mind, and again, focus on that end goal, what you're trying to accomplish with your research will go far in helping real people in real situations communicate more effectively. Thank you.